thank you to our show sponsors, The Sharp Edge, Corteva Enlist E3, and ADAMA Canada. While other sources of innovation run dry and fail to understand your needs, ADAMA is here to deliver, and we're all in on you. Talk to your ADAMA sales rep today. Hello and welcome to the Agronomists. I am your host, Lindsay Smith, and yes, thank you, Milkabot, for welcome everybody, and Ray as well, your guest from last week. Super excited about tonight's program. Yes, this prairie girl is about to learn all about tile drainage, and I got to tell you, I got a lot to learn. So let's learn together. Because if it's fun, it gets done. So there you go. If you collect CEU credits, and I know there's a lot of people out there looking for those water management credits, head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomists tomorrow. Let us know that you watched the program and fill out that little form, and you'll get your CEU credits. And there's a couple different ones that you can apply for. So there you go. Did want to quickly just mention we only have a few weeks left before the holidays. So we do have next week. We've got an Agritechnica sneak peek rear view look lined up. And then the week after that will be our year-end show. So we'll wrap up the year, talk about the top agronomic issues of the year. So just keep that in mind, 8 p.m. Eastern, of course, for the next couple of weeks. Then we'll be off for the holidays. Hello to John. Good to see you there. All right. So tonight we are talking tile drainage, what to think about when you're planning it, some of the pitfalls, some of the big questions that everybody's got, and of course, some of the benefits too. So we'll be talking about that as well. So to have that discussion, let's bring in our guests. I'm super excited. Two newbies. I've got with me Matt Williams of Williams Drainage and Jesse Tait of Tait Brothers Contracting. Welcome here, gents.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Okay, Matt, I'll start with you. Introduce yourself to the audience. Where do you hail from? Where does Williams Drainage do their work?
So we're based out of North Perth, which is southwestern Ontario. That's where our head office is. We generally work in a span of about 1 hour in most directions from that location. We started in the spring of 1984. My parents started the business, so I'm second generation contractor. Luckily for me, this is all I've ever done. So I'm sure there's other cleaner jobs out there, but I guess I just never done them. So we're good.
None would be as fun. Also, hats off
That's
to your
right.
parents for starting a business in 1984. If anyone remembers,
Yeah.
which I don't, I was too young. Not exactly a great time to start a business. So well done. Hats off to them.
Thank you.
And Jesse, whereabouts are you located in the province?
I'm in northwestern Ontario. I work primarily now in the Rainy River District and then Thunder Bay District. The company originally started in Grand Valley, just about a couple hours from, well, just a little over an hour from Matt's place. We work south, east, north, just wherever the tide takes us that time. I'm a fourth generation drainage contractor, so my great grandfather started this, and my grandfather and father worked in the business together until his passing, and then I have bought in with my father, and he's going to retire. So that's actually something funny that a Tait's never done yet. So,
oh, well, good of you to be supportive of that. Not everybody necessarily takes the chance, so I'm glad that he is. All right, so I love that vibe though. That with agriculture, so many of our businesses, our farms are multi-generational. So great to see that, of course, for those companies that support agriculture, we've got similar things. So yes, John says, oh, silly Lindsay, vivid memories of 1984. Yes, well, John, you're a different vintage than I am. All right. So there you go. Okay. So let's start with, there are a few myths with tile drainage. There's a few things that maybe get talked about or people don't entirely always understand, those sorts of things. Matt, I'll start with you with first really laying it down. What is tile drainage? And then I'll ask, of course, what it is not. But what are we talking about when we're talking about tile drainage?
The easiest way I like to describe tile drainage is the process of pouring. A lot of people don't realize that tile drains don't actually drain from the top, they drain from the bottom. So it's actually the water table coming up into the tile, the clean water that's being removed, so that surface water and rain events have somewhere to go. And in order for it to get to the water table, it has to be filtered through the soil.
So Matt, I am one of those people. I had no idea. I honestly was like, it's like a trickle down. It trickles down and then out it goes. So, Jesse, is that a misconception that you tackle quite a bit, or how do you explain these things? And is it important to explain these things?
Yes, it's very important. Most people think that when we're out there trying to remove some of this water, A, we're going to drain their well, or B, all this water has to instantly get into that tile. And I'm like, we're really making a sponge. We're making a 2 to 3 foot sponge on the surface. Let's keep the water from coming up so high so you can get on the ground when you need to get on the ground. And then when you do have these rain events, it has somewhere to go. So you have some percolation, it gets back down into that nice sponge that you've created.
So in that sponge, so as I think about it, so tile is usually 2 to 3 feet down. Matt, what is sort of the standard depending on soil type?
Yep, that's correct. Obviously, the heavier soils, you tend to want to keep it a little bit shallower within the limits, but when you get into those lighter soils, then you tend to go a little deeper so it can draw farther. But that's all determined from the test holes and knowing your area for sure.
Okay, and so we create that 2 to 3 feet, as you said, that sponge that then isn't having the water table come up from below, so it gives enough percolation room down. All right, now when it comes to sort of that beginning process of deciding, okay, it's worth it, I'm going to tile. Matt, walk me through sort of the beginning of the planning process. Is it a complicated process? Is this something that you very much are walking farmers through from point A to point B and onward? Or what does that look like?
In our area, most of our work is repeat business. So obviously most of the farmers and the landowners, dial drainage has been such a common practice for such a long time that it's more so you have your contractor or you find your contractor. That's your first step. And then from there, it's the process that we take over. We start with a survey. We survey the land. Most of us contractors are using full GPS now, so we can come up with a full topographic map based on the GPS survey. Then we can come up with a real accurate design on our computers once the design is completed and all the rules are followed and the laws in the book that we're supposed to follow, which is called Publication 29. Then we can come up with our materials list and our quote, and then provide that for the landowner so that they have a budget to work with. Or if they're pricing other contractors, then you have a better idea what to expect from each contractor. Then the next step, you can dig your test holes, determine the soil type so that you're using the right type of tile, and to confirm that you're using the right tile spacing, which we can get into in a bit as well. Mm-hmm. Once that's done, then you order your materials, and then the installation process can begin.
I have seen a few fields near me with the giant rolls of tubes sitting waiting to get rolling. So it's been an interesting year for that sort of stuff. So Jesse, that is, he did mention Pub 29. I have learned that this is a very important document that drainage contractors sleep with under their pillow. Look, there it is. I can't imagine that is terribly convenient under your pillow, but there you go. So Jesse, walk me through it, because we are going to talk about spacing. But there is sort of minimum standards that have to be met as far as spacing and basic setup. And then from there, you can add on. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So within Pub 29, first we would talk with our contractor. You didn't quite mention it there, Matt, but the coefficient. So that's how much water we can actually remove from the ground in 24 hours. Okay. Now, ground type or soil type does have a factor to this, but we have a minimum we can follow. So if it's going to be a truck crop or a cash crop compared to maybe apples or a forage crop, it all has a different coefficient. So now getting back to your your question, the spacings are set for areas. So if you have an S3 soil to a G2 soil, these are all going to depend on the spacings, your minimum spacings within Pub 29. So that is often a question a farmer will ask, well, can I just put in tile every 100 feet right now and I'll come back and split it later? You could. The main is still going to be designed for the entire field, whether or not you put in tile 20 feet apart or 150 feet apart. So that is a consideration when you're doing it. So the minimums are great. If you need to do tighter spacings in worse spots, you can go and split those later or fill those when you need to. But yeah, there is a basic minimum. Where I'm working in Northwestern Ontario, a lot of people are actually using the grant. So it's a Northern Ontario Heritage Fund Corporation gives a grant for up to $500 an acre, and we are bound to do the absolute minimums at minimum, and then anything
Right.
better than that.
So, and I mean, and we can dig into that a little bit. I'm going to say that too many times, and I don't mean it as a pun. But Matt, you did mention there are different kinds of tile. So, what choices as a contractor or as a farmer are you going to have to make? Is it just tile like size? Are there different types? What do we have to decide between?
Yep, there's definitely different tile sizes. Most common in most of Ontario, I would say, is still 4-inch tile for laterals. Some use 3-inch tile and have experimented with that. And we find that it comes and goes in popularity depending on different factors. But for the most part, 4-inch is the most standard for laterals. And then they also go 6, 8, 10, 12, 15-inch in agricultural plastic. Then when you get into the larger stuff, you have to go either dual wall or concrete. The reason for the different sizing basically is the amount of acres that it's draining, and so that it can handle the capacity of water. And that's all determined by, like I said, the acres to carry as well as the grade on the tile to determine the size of tile needed. And that's all part of the design process. As far as the different types of tile itself, regular cut is your standard holes in the tile for drainage purposes. They also make a fine cut. So if you're into silty clay soils that don't quite need filter, but are still silty enough, you use fine cut tile. They do make a chip cut tile, which is a really big hole. Some people like to use that in muck soils or really, really heavy, tight clay. And then there's filter, as I mentioned, which if you're into sandy conditions or even borderline sandy conditions, by all means, you want to use filter because that's your best insurance against those type of soil conditions.
Now, great question here from Jason. Jason Vogt is out of Manitoba, and there is some tile drainage in Manitoba for sure. Not a lot, not nearly like Ontario, but there has been for quite some time, certainly on some of the higher value, like potato ground, that sort of stuff. But Jason wants to know, and Jesse, I'll go to you on this one. What have been the biggest drivers for a grower to tile? Is it just the high water table, or does salinity or other issues play a role? Or is it really all just about a higher water table than is perhaps wanted?
Actually, salinity was one of the driving factors years ago. They did quite a bit of that. We actually were in India for 3 years putting in drainage systems just to get rid of the salinity in the soil. So yeah. Yes, it does get rid of the salinity as well. It's probably not the largest driver in Ontario, but it does have that effect to get rid of that. But I would say we're still working mostly with water table. Most of Ontario is getting 40 to 45 inches of rain a year. So that's pretty wet, and that's the farmers just need to get onto their land earlier or whatever. So that's how that works.
With apologies to the prairies. Sorry, guys. Go ahead, Matt.
Just to add to that, the other driving factor, which I think a lot of the people in our area and your area as well, Jesse would attest to, is the price of land. That's been a real driving factor for tile drainage because the value of land, you want to get, every ounce of production out of it that you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you can't buy more, you make what you have better. So, and tile drainage, as far as I understand it, is probably the number one. I know that there's the whole nutrient, you spend your first dime on lime. I feel like we need a catchy slogan for spending the first dollar on drainage. So somebody work out what that is in a rhyme, and I will totally use it here. So there you go. Now, Peter wants you to explain coefficients a bit better. And I think that's fair, because what does like a 1/2 inch or a 1 inch coefficient? Matt, I'll ask you, what would that mean if I see that in a report, or you come to my farm and you tell me what the coefficient is?
Sure. So Jesse did touch on it there, but I think he was talking really fast. So we'll try and say it a little bit slower here this time. So 1/2 inch, for example, would be a 1/2 inch of rain in a 24-hour period. So that's what the system would be designed for. So when you get a 4-inch rain overnight, like if we have seen much more common, systems are not designed. Most systems are not designed for that, obviously. Now, a big reason for that, you have to consider your outlet. Because if you design to a 1 inch or an inch and a half drainage coefficient, but it's a municipal drain that you're connecting into and it was originally designed at half inch, you're creating a bottleneck and you're just creating problems downstream. So those are all the factors that you really want to take into account. And also, if you do have everything, for example, if everything in Ontario was drained to a, say, an inch and a half to 2 inch drainage coefficient, including the outlets, you can create a lot of flooding really fast, because then you're just moving all the water downstream much
Really
quicker than if it's designed at that half inch. So it's a touchy subject when dealing with some customers, because some are willing to pay the extra money and want everything drained really quickly, but you have to think about infrastructure when you do those sorts of things.
Matt, you have opened up a can of worms in my brain, not necessarily elsewhere. But Jesse, this is a good point. And you when you talked about sort of the minimums, everything though hinges on the outlet. In that realistically, you have to work backwards from what the outlet can maintain or can actually handle, right? So in your example where you said, you could go wider and split them later, you would still have to take into consideration what the outlet can handle, right?
That's correct. So when I set up a design, we work basically with the coefficient first, and then we start spacing accordingly. I guess the pitfall to, oh, sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought, but sorry.
It's okay.
The pitfall to closer, shallower tile as opposed to deeper, wider spaced tile is, sorry, why can't I talk here?
It's all right. Take your time. We have an entire hour. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Matt I guess Matt was talking on that one before. It's actually going to be the soil which allows the water to get to this tile. When we're working with the coefficients, it's all going to come out of that main regardless. So it doesn't matter how much 4-inch laterals or 3-inch laterals you put into those systems. The choke point essentially is back to that main, which was what I was trying to say.
And you did. So it's fine. Yeah, we got it out. It's all right. Okay, so but that is a key consideration though. And so I guess my follow-up to that question, Matt, would be, and I know, and if no one has seen the Talking Tile series that we've done yet, please go check it out. It's on our YouTube channel. You'll see these two gentlemen in that series. One of the discussion points, of course, is on planning that outlet. So planning what you have access to, working with your municipality, all of those things. Are you coming across a point where that outlet point is a pinch point, or do we have the infrastructure in place that is working okay, at least for your area?
It varies even in our area itself. There's definitely municipal drains out there that are completely overloaded. And, when they were originally designed, whether it was back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, they were designed for the era. So what was considered drainage or systematic drainage back then is certainly not to the standard of what is being done now. So you really have to be careful how you go and approach putting a new system in place if the outlet is definitely not big enough, because you can definitely enter yourself into a lawsuit or create just terrible neighbor situations. So it's good to have the plan in place first, but then you have to start doing the legwork, talking to the neighbors and making sure you talk to your local drainage superintendent to make sure that everything is being done by the book.
This is like the modern version of good fences make good neighbors. Good drainage outlets make good neighbors. Nobody has fences anymore. Go ahead, Jesse.
A good talking point is when we do have these extreme rain events that we are getting now, that water is running off to these ditches over land. So drainage is actually creating that sponge, so some of this water has somewhere to go. If you don't have drainage, that ground could already be saturated and thus wouldn't allow any infiltration. The caveat to that is if you have surface inlets, you can really increase the drainage into the subsystem and out of an outlet quicker. But yeah, it's the major rain events that we're having, not necessarily the systems that have been designed. It's, I think, climate change that is driving some of these issues as well.
You're allowed to use that word, Jesse. We can use it. It comes up because, and I mean, whether we want to call it climate change or not, just even let's call it more extreme weather events, but realistically in the last 5 years alone, exactly that, we've had not just incredibly, like, a lot of water in a short amount of time, but also I know for my area, and I'm quite far from both of you, but in the east, we've had very late in the season rain, and like big rain events way later than we would normally sort of expect them. We've had, creeks and things that are overflowing as if it were spring melt in like November. Like, it's a bit bizarre, and to try and deal with all that water is an absolute huge challenge. So, I mean, really, it's a good point that you bring up, though, Jesse, that realistically, in a major rain event, it would actually be worse if there wasn't tile drainage, is I think part of that point, right? In that the rain hitting the fields that are tile drained are going to be able to hold at least some more if they're not already saturated. But you're still going to see overland water movement, which is not good, but there's only so much we can do. And when 4 inches of rain falls in a couple hours, there's not a system in the world, I think, that can handle it. Now, let's just very quickly, Producer Jay, if you could, we're going to throw to our second sponsor read of the night, and then we're going to come back and talk more tile drainage. Our sponsors for the Agronomists are ADAMA Canada, The Sharp Edge, and Enlist E3 from Corteva. Looking for high yields and clean fields? Choose Enlist E3 soybeans. Part of the Enlist weed control system, Enlist E3 soybeans help you control tough weeds, providing herbicide choice and tank mix flexibility. Enlist E3 soybeans, the best in beans, period. Sorry, I'm getting really good at the air drums, you guys. Okay, so between the opening segment. Okay, Jason's got another question here, and Peter makes a point about the environmental side, which we are going to touch on a little bit later. Jason has a question. What has been the most elaborate system for a pump out? Like Jesse said, we don't always have a good natural outlet. What have you done, and is there a limit? So I guess from the outlet perspective, what is the most creative and or large scale solution either of you have worked with? Matt, maybe I'll go to you first, if that's okay.
I don't want to piss anybody off, but we're pretty lucky where we are. We generally have really good outlet options. I say this because we do get working further north and in other areas that don't have the infrastructure, and then you really have to be creative and find your outlets. But for the most part, we're very fortunate. We have the topography and the ditch systems and the municipal drains that we haven't really gotten into too many pump systems.
Jesse, I feel like maybe you have a different answer.
Yeah, we've worked in the Holland Marsh, the Innisfil Marsh, where we've had to put. Yeah. There's massive pump stations in there. We're not the only contractors doing that, but I've actually put in quite a few pump stations up here in northwestern Ontario now, because we just don't have the grade. They do have good municipal drain infrastructure, but most of it was designed for surface drainage, not necessarily subsurface drainage. So lots of these ditches are running 5, 6, 7 miles at 0.03. So we really have to be able to get the water out of the field, pump it up, let it stay in the ditch for a little while, and then it finally gets away.
Yeah. Jason is from southern Manitoba. He knows all about not having grade. There isn't. Is there such a thing as just none? There's just none. Anyway, so yes, he knows all about that. Ray has thrown out as an option, instead of first time on Lyme, tile, and you smile. I like it, Ray, but keep working on it. Okay. Now, Jesse, in the Talking Tile series, the video that you are in, let's talk a little bit of the kind of specifics of and the practicality of actually getting a field done. Certainly there are considerations after the tile goes in to actually manage that land in the first little while, to manage, of course, where the tile has gone in. There's, perhaps compaction concerns. What is sort of your best advice for once a field has been tiled, how you manage that field as far as crop rotation, those sorts of things for the first little while?
Well, it's not just the first little while, it's for life. So tile is one of those things you do once. So if you were talking about, first dime, spend it on lime, I say drainage is probably the first thing you should spend your money on, because it's the only thing that you'll only ever do once, and it will continue working for many, many, many years. Now, moving forward, once we get a good design, a good installed system. When you start working the runs down, give them some time to settle. I know everybody's very gung-ho to get out there and let's, hammer it out. It's good, and I know you want to get onto this nicely tiled field, but give it some time to settle. If you get your work done maybe in the fall or later in the year, let that stuff sit over the winter. That's actually some of the best advice I can give. Once the maintaining of keeping your outlets clear, keeping surface inlets clean so that water can get away and get where it needs to go is ideal. The biggest thing I say is we'll put in a great system sometimes, and it's not putting the blame on the farmer, but we do have to follow the better farming practices. If you have the best system in the world under concrete, it's not going to drain what comes down. So right. Matt talked before, the water comes up from underneath. We get that water away so it doesn't come to the surface. You got to mitigate as much compaction as you can so that we have that nice sponge and the water can get into the soil and it does the plants it's good down there at the roots, right? So I say whatever you can do. Crop rotations are fantastic. Lots of the dairy guys, they actually have better luck with drainage than maybe habitual cash croppers, because they do have to put a forage crop in once in a while, and that all those roots down there, they give airspace. You don't have to get out there right in the spring of the year and get on top of that with heavy equipment sometimes. So that it all just helps. Tile is really a tool in the toolbox. It's not the say all, end all, and be all. So, and that's hard to say as a drainage contractor.
But it is also, to that point, you're right. It's a big investment, but you do it once and it pays for decades. So there isn't really anything else we do. You did mention roots. We are going to talk about those in a little bit, but Bill has a question. Matt, I'll go to you. You did mention, I think, sort of in the outset that, of course, you're mapping fields. That's very key. What about locating older tile in non-mapped fields? I got to wonder what you guys have dug up at times, to be honest. That might be a whole other show. Agronomists After Dark. But yeah, where do you start on an older field that maybe has tile or had tile, but you can't find it? Where do you start?
Knowledge. We've noticed a big difference. If you send out a contractor or one of your employees or somebody who really understands drainage, it's a huge asset because you know what to look for to begin with. Short of that, going back to the tools in the toolbox, you need to know a lot of good swear words when you're locating tile because it can get really long and really frustrating. We have tried ground penetrating radar. We owned one for a few years, but in our area, there's so many rocks that we did not have very good luck with it. If you're in areas that are straight clay, some contractors swear by them. They do a fantastic job, but it just comes down to the area that you're in. Beyond that, you can often see it in the crop stubble, or if there's standing crop, it's another good way to pick out existing tile drains. So sometimes what we've done is we'll send out a drone when the crop is standing, and it gives you an idea on the pattern, providing there's no map, of course, and that can give you an idea when it's off roughly what angle the runs go on, things like that. And then aerial imagery like Google Earth and the drainage website, things like that. Sometimes you can pick out drainage systems on those websites as well, and it gives you a really good idea just because you can see the soil's darker or lighter depending on the time of year. Whether you're looking at the crop, it's often darker, but if you're looking in the spring when it's dirt, then it lightens up on the top of the drains before everywhere else.
Now, why does it matter to find the old stuff?
Depending on the shape of it, you want to save the existing tile, then you have to locate each one if you're going to be putting new runs in between, or if you're going to be working around an existing system. Generally, what I recommend to customers, if they don't know if it's worth saving, say, well, let's start by doing some locating, see what shape it's in, what depth it is, if the tile's brittle, if it's full of silt, mud, things like that. You'll know pretty quick once you start locating, this is a waste of time. We don't want to be saving this system. We don't have confidence in it. But if you start locating and everything's clean, nice depth, you can tell it has good grade and it's been working well, then by all means it's worth investigating and then splitting those runs, providing the mains are sized accordingly.
Mm-hmm. Jesse, I think I have old clay tiles. It's still good. How old is that? Is that super old? Yeah.
No, they were putting in clay right into the 80s, actually late 70s, early 80s.
Cool.
But yeah, some of the systems, some of the older systems I've seen were actually cedar hollowed logs
Wow.
upside down, and it's
Yeah.
still working. So
Mhm.
if you have a good clay system, it's actually has a higher flow rate than corrugated plastic tubing. So, and there's nothing wrong with clay as long as, like Matt said,
Still
it's
working.
got good depth, good grade, and it's working. You can hook into those systems, and it will do nothing but improve the field.
Okay.
The biggest caveat I've told customers when you're dealing with clay tile is obviously the depth, like I said, is big,
Yeah.
but also it can get brittle. And the difference between plastic and clay, when plastic, if it's squashed by large equipment, because believe it or not, the tractors now are a little bigger than back in the 60s. So
Mm.
if it's squashed with plastic tile, it'll go oval, but it would still work. Whereas clay
Right.
tile, you're going to end up with a hole in the
Okay.
field, and
Yeah.
nobody wants to be dealing with those all the time. So you just want to make sure that it's deep enough and in really good shape before you move on.
Okay. Yes, Peter, I'm a post clay tile model. But it's around. I've seen it. So there you go. Okay. Fred has a question, and I don't expect you guys to be experts, but it does relate to. So his question is about beaver dams on open ditches, plugging outlets. Let's just make it even general. Who's responsible for keeping outlets clear? Jesse, you're smiling, so I'm going to make you answer that one. but but yes, I know that there are some contentious issues out there. So what's the rule of thumb here when we're talking about obstructions or things that might need cleared out?
Okay, so the first step was the outlets that you have that are for your property, you're responsible for keeping them clean. If they go into an open municipal drain and the municipal drain has some damage in it, then you can ask for it to be cleaned out, or that's all within maintenance of a municipal drain. Once it gets to a natural water course, it's actually nobody's responsibility.
Oh.
So it's everybody's problem. We learned
But
that in the
no one.
drainage superintendent's course.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah, it can actually be a real bone of contention there, because
Yeah.
what do you do if you have a good municipal drain, it's been brought to sufficient outlet, which could be a river or a creek, and then somewhere down there the beavers have built it up, and so on and so forth. So you would have to work with your municipality. After that, then you have to work with whoever gets rid
Yeah.
of the beavers.
Right. Just key point for everybody. Just getting rid of the dam doesn't solve the problem. And ask me
Definitely.
how I know. Anyway, but for some reason people are like, well, we'll just get rid of the dam. I don't know if you know beavers, but they'll just build another one. Anyway, sorry, Matt.
Yeah, that definitely doesn't solve the problem. It'll solve it for the night, but it's usually
Yeah,
back there
that's
the
about
next
it.
day. So
Yeah.
definitely you have to trap them. And most municipalities, at least in our area, they have a trapper or even a list of trappers that they will contact, and then they'll come in and remove them, and then they go ahead and clean it out.
All right. Wonderful. All right. Now we're getting into what I can only assume. I've heard Peter Johnson use this word, Hickenbottom. So I know it's a real word, or at least for Peter's genre it is. But it says, do you recommend Hickenbottom or stone pockets? And I'm not even going to pretend to know what this means. So I hope, Matt or Jesse, that you may have an idea of what is meant by this question. Who wants to take
So
it? Matt,
Hickenbottom
go ahead.
is a lot like Ski-Doo. So Ski-Doo was the brand that
Ah,
started.
right.
So
Okay. Like,
Hickenbottom is the biggest name in inlets. So it's those orange standpipes that you see along fence lines and in low spots that allow the water to get into the tile drainage system faster, but it can create a environmental issue. According
okay.
to the book, you're supposed to stay 50 feet away from those with your fertilizers and your manures and things like that. But obviously, if it's a
Okay.
dish and everything's draining to that point, doesn't matter how far away you stay, it's all going to
Right.
run to that point. So that's when the 4 hours become critical, especially right
Yeah.
timing, right? You don't want to be spreading close to a Hickenbottom before a big rain event because of the environmental issue. So from that standpoint, Peter, when it comes to blind inlets, which just to let everybody know, a blind inlet, that's where you dig down to the tile drain and then fill the trench to the surface with 3/4 stone or washed drainage stone so that the
Yeah.
water can get through the soil faster to get to the system so that you don't get that ponding water. From that standpoint, the tile drainage is a little better with a blind inlet because you get a little bit of filtration, but basically you're still just putting the water directly into the tile, but at least then you don't have to work around a hick and bottom.
Right. Okay, that is an excellent explanation. But that is also to the point earlier of the environmental impact. Those, though, are going to be dealing more with surface water getting to the tile more so than the tile actually that's keeping the water table lower. So that's why
right.
the setbacks would occur. Okay.
Yeah, if you go back to Jesse's
yeah.
comment, if you go back to Jesse's comment about you can put the perfect system in, but if it's under concrete, there's no point. So imagine you have compaction issues, which might not necessarily just be from the farmer. It could be from heavy rain events, because that can create compaction, or it could be just a matter of you need to cure it so that it can heal. So essentially all you're doing is you're drilling a hole in the soil or the concrete, let's say, to allow the water to get through so that it can heal, is the way I like to word it to people.
Okay. So, and this is a good segue too. And Jason had a question about visuals. So, producer Jay, if you could queue up, I did pull from the Talking Tile series. I did pull the discussion that Mel Limas had with Bernd Tobin about the environmental impact, because of course the environment is a huge consideration in doing this, and there are certainly some myths that about tile drainage, and certainly some considerations like the difference between surface water movement and water moving through subsurface. So producer Jay, if you could run the clip from Talking Tile with Mel Limas.
Now, Mel, let's talk more about nitrogen and phosphorus here. How are these nutrients lost, and what's the impact of drainage?
They're two very different nutrients. Nitrogen is often lost through off-gassing, through nitrous oxide, whereas phosphorus is bound to the soil, so it's lost when there's soil erosion. But both of them have a dissolved form, which is important because that's how the plant would uptake it, but that puts them at risk for leaving through the tile drainage systems. But in terms of numbers, I think the research best done by Dr. Maren McRae at Waterloo, it's just a few pounds an acre that's being lost, maybe 2 to 3% of what's being applied, and about 50% is coming through the tile itself.
So, Mel, how does drainage impact that?
Again, there's pros and cons. So drainage is dropping the water table down 2 to 3 feet. So that means that there's air in the topsoil, which means an automatic reduction of nitrous oxide emissions by 50%. That's Dr. Mike Castellano's research in Ohio, at least. So that's 30 to 90 pounds less nitrogen that you even need to apply. So that's a huge environmental win, especially considering that nitrous oxide is a greenhouse gas. That's why the federal government has come down with that goal to reduce emissions. So that's a win for the nitrogen, but on the phosphorus side, it's also it allows for the water to infiltrate into the soil better because there's the drainage, and so it's already reducing that soil erosion. But then again, on the other hand, the drainage system itself becomes a transport pathway for the phosphorus and the nitrogen for the dissolved parts of it. But that also gives us an opportunity to control and treat it within the system itself.
So as you say, there are certainly, trade-offs when it comes to drainage. How do we do a better job of preventing those nutrients from leaving the field and keeping them in the field, where they can drive crop production?
Exactly, that's where they should stay. The rule of thumb is the closer to the field you are, the cheaper the solutions. And we often say avoid, control, treat. So if you avoid the problem in the first place, these are excess nutrients that are leaving through the system. It's important to consider that. So the 4R nutrient stewardship, that's always where it starts. Think about your rates, but also the timing, especially of manure when the nutrients are released. If there's a living crop, or a cover crop in this case, that can take up those nutrients, that's the best. You're avoiding the problem in the first place. And here we've strip-tilled, and we're really strategically placing the nutrients where the crop is going to need them. So that's avoid. But when it gets into the system itself, that's where you could either control or treat the water.
The Agronomist is brought to you by ADAMA Canada, Enlist E3 from Corteva, and The Sharp Edge. The Sharp Edge is a video series where we look to farmers, agronomists, and researchers to give us the sharp edge on everything from agronomic problem solving to increasing profitability and improving sustainability. The Sharp Edge is made possible by support from Mazak Seeds. Find the videos on our YouTube channel. Let's talk phosphorus and nitrogen. Okay, so Mel does a great job of hitting on a couple things, and Matt, I know you mentioned it as well, is the 4R nutrient stewardship. So, I mean, that realistically plays in across the board. But what are some of the most common concerns or questions you have to field as a drainage contractor when it comes to, nutrient movement or what you're trying to, or soil movement, what you're trying to avoid? Matt, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so we always get asked about, the outlet pipe is a direct path or polluting the waterways and all this stuff because of obviously the information that's got there with phosphorus and nitrates and so on. But Sid Vanderveen always had a really good quote that I liked. It was, somebody in the city or anywhere and say, do the highways pollute the air? And they'll say, yeah. And they say, well, no, it doesn't. It's the cars that pollute the air, right? So it all comes back to management and how you treat these systems. And I don't know, that was always my favorite one when it came to that, I guess.
Jesse, how do you tackle that question on water movement and nutrient movement?
Yeah, I guess it's a kind of a double-edged sword. We need the stuff there. It's when we apply it, how much you apply. Just going back to your R's again there. But I've also said without drainage, if you had this stuff on the ground, just like any good farmer would, and you have these rain events, this stuff's still going to leach out, get around. It's going to find its way. So I'm not going to lie to you and say that, the stuff doesn't come out of the tile outlet. But if you're going to put it on there, it's going to go somewhere. So it's all about how much you put it on, when you put it on. Let's, do our best farm practices so we'll mitigate what's going to come through the soil, right? And through the outlet at the end of the day.
So Peter Johnson weighed in earlier that surface water is typically 10 times higher in nutrient content. So by trying to avoid surface water movement, by encouraging that percolation through the soil profile, that goes a long way in decreasing the total amount of nutrients that are at risk to move off that field. So I think it's really important to recognize exactly that. It's not no risk, but it's a risk we can manage. And that tile drainage doesn't make it worse. And in fact, for a lot of things, it makes it a lot better, which is pretty interesting how that works. So let's talk. And Jason's got some good comments I want to touch on in a bit. But we did mention roots. Jesse, I'll start with you. Let's say I just had a field tiled this year. And so then I put in winter canola. Is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? Which roots are the worst roots?
On a freshly installed system, the worst possible crop you could do would be winter canola. It can devastate a system in one season. So just got to talk to your contractor. We need to know what's going to happen right after because we don't want to have to go kind of clean that stuff up. But alfalfa roots can be an issue. Tree roots, especially if they're up against a neighbor's property or whatever, so you can't actually do anything about their trees. Yeah. That being said, we do have certain tricks of the trade that we try to use. We keep our mains away from that stuff so you can try to stay away from all that water-loving trees, willows, and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, you're going to get roots in tile. It's a beautiful spot. You've had, that's where the roots are supposed to be going down to that tiled area. So they always have water. That's why drainage does such a good job in a drought situation. So we've already gotten rid of that water at the spring of the year. So the roots have went down. They're down near the tile. If we get a drought event, then all of a sudden the roots down, 16, 18 inches deep, they got lots of moisture. So they're going to make it through the hard time. They're not going to strain quite so bad. So we're going to put in a drainage system. You're going to get roots down there. Most of the time, they're just little wee hairs. They can get away. I believe, Matt, you had a bunch of work done there and you started putting just external couplers on and stuff like that. And that's helped from catching all those little hair roots in tiles. So they create balls or whatever inside. And then, you have to dig them up and find them. People have tried back flushing. I've seen that work before as well. So it is it's one of those risks you can take. But for the most part, if you're consistently just cash cropping with, wheat, beans, canola, whatever, you're not going to have that issue with your drainage system.
Matt, do you have a favorite first crop after a field is tiled that you recommend?
The honest answer is any crop. The biggest thing for us is timing. Obviously, we wish we could do all of the work in a year, in that nice 2 months after wheat. But reality is we can't just work for 2 months of the year, and it's a matter of just trying to get everybody happy as quick as possible. A lot of guys like to do corn because obviously it's a little higher for the combine head. So if you do get a bit of settlement over the winter and the spring when you plant your corn, or even if you do it before corn in the spring, when you get a little bit of settlement, you're not fighting with it like you can be with beans, where you have to get the head down nice and low. But other than that, just to Jesse's point about the canola roots, to keep in mind, the reason for that is because the soil is loose where we plow through the ground and install the tile. So it's just easier for those roots to go down deeper. And that's why in the first year, it's the most vulnerable for that sort of thing. And also going back to what you said at the start of the podcast about working the runs down right away. If you're in rocky soil, especially, you really want to let it settle naturally, because if the ground can settle around the rock as opposed to you driving on it with a big tire, it's going to shove it into the tile. Whereas if the ground can settle naturally, you're 90% or higher not going to have a problem.
So now winter canola, of course, has a big taproot. But if it is after wheat later in the year, are all winter seeded crops off the table that first year because of that, looser soil in those tile runs? Or, would a cover crop or something else, if it's and then just terminate? Are we really worried about something that overwinters in that first year?
Yeah, I think the deeper roots definitely are more of a concern, your radishes, things like that. I've had customers tell me that they've had really good luck with mixing. Don't just run all of one anything. Have a nice mixture of different types of cover crop going in. That seems to work well for them. But certainly it doesn't matter what you do. In that first year, it's going to be vulnerable because of the loose soil.
So now Tim couldn't make it on tonight, but he did send, and this was one of his questions, was should he plant winter canola, which is a no. But his follow-up question was, if you've got roots plugging tile, is that just, luck of the draw and it happens? Or is there a correlation between more plugging and, say, more challenging areas that have been tiled? Jesse, can you think of that? Or no?
Yeah, in some cases it is luck of the draw. Sometimes I've had a bunch of issues in time when people have left alfalfa for 15 years. And now alfalfa likes nice deep roots and it's going to go for water. So, and it's not when it's actually growing, it's when you kill it out. So you spray that alfalfa out, and now all those little hairs inside, they don't have no reason to pull water up anymore. Now they start breaking off and they roll down. So it would be a good time to maybe do that is after it's quit growing for the season. So there's always going to be a little bit of those roots and stuff off the alfalfa. So, when do you want to decimate the alfalfa? The other thing is, I don't know, and I've actually asked a lot of other contractors, I don't have nearly as much issues with roots and tile with filtered tile. So I don't know why it grows around the filter as opposed to through the filter and into the tile. So that's a whole other conversation to have, and there's got to be a little bit more research done on that for sure. But yeah, sometimes it is just luck of the draw. If you have really nice loose soil and it can get around it, I've found when you get into some maybe medium to rocky, gravelly kind of granular stuff, it can really head to it because you're already got a pretty dry soil there, and then the roots are going to get in there even worse.
Mm-hmm. Matt, do you notice a difference with tile type?
Yeah, definitely a little bit less with the filter, to Jesse's point. I guess because we're dealing with agriculture, just like everybody, it's all percentages. There isn't ever going to be a 100% success rate or failure rate for the most part. Some of the things we've noticed is when there's a deviation in tile grade, whether that be you hit a rock or something like that, the tile has a bit of a dip and it tends to hold water in that one spot. We have noticed that the roots seem to know where that water sits. And that could also be if you cut through an old clay tile or an existing tile where there's a bit of water accumulated. What Jesse mentioned about how we switched 4-inch couplings, about 5 or 6 years ago, we switched to external couplers as opposed to internal couplers because we were noticing a lot of spots where the roots were bunched up was at an internal coupler just because there was a bit of a restriction there. So we have noticed pretty good success by doing that. It was just an easy thing to switch. And then other than that, I want to really make it clear that the benefits to the cover crops far outweigh the little bit of maintenance that goes along with these roots, as well as growing wheat and canola. Just like Jesse mentioned earlier, they're so good for the soil. It far outweighs, don't steer away from it just because you might get some crop roots in, because it's usually a quick and easy fix. And I know for us in our area, we've been fortunate that we get crop roots every year, yes, but as a percentage of the jobs that we've done, it's a low percentage. Like, we're not getting whole system failures. I know, Jesse, you had mentioned you have had close situations like that with the canola, but like, we haven't seen any major failures. It's usually like, if we're going to go to a farm after a couple of years, it's like 1 or 2 spots. The worst one I think we had was maybe 15. But again, that's a day's work. You get them all cleaned up and then you're good. We don't generally come back to the same spot.
Okay. And I did want to point out that the numbers are in for the canola crop here in Ontario, and we here at the Relag team, being mostly Westerners to begin with, we're like gobsmacked, like over like 100 bushels, like no prob, guys. That's insane for canola. Anyway, so Jason, who would love to grow 100 bushel canola crops and probably has got close, he's got a question. Now, he's in Manitoba, and when he says heavy clay, y'all, he means heavy clay. This is a river bottom. Okay. What are the best and key things to consider for growers wanting to look at tile on heavy clay? Yes. And so I love the Red River clay because I get taller as I walk across the fields. It just collects and collects and collects. So Jesse, maybe I'll start with you because Matt, I feel like you don't ever deal with heavy clays in north parts. I'm just kidding. We'll go back there. But Jesse, I'll start with you. What's your best advice on heavy clays?
It's a tighter soil, so it's going to be a little tougher for the water to get there. But once you get it dry and you get that fracture and you have that ability for the water to start doing lateral movement within the soil, it responds just as good as anything else. It takes a lot longer. So I won't BS anybody and be like, oh yeah, instant. So we've always said that tile usually takes up to 7 years. 4 to 7 is a really good number, I guess, to say that's when you see your absolute best system working. And then from then on, with a heavy clay, it can take maybe 8 or 9 years, and it's how you try to alleviate that plasticity and try to get some of that water moving into the soil quicker. But it does help. It's worked. Some of the ground I work with up in the Rainy River District, we're not that far from Manitoba, and I've seen some of these old lake bottoms and river bottoms, and it's tough stuff. It doesn't respond as fast, but it definitely does respond.
Mm-hmm. Matt, are you very glad
A
you
lot
don't
of
deal with things?
Oh, we've had a few jobs where you take a scoop with the excavator and you dump, and it looks like a perfect bucket sitting on top of the ground. It just doesn't
Yeah.
break apart. You'd swear it was molded concrete that had already dried. We get into some of that stuff too. First thing, I guess, is people say, and I 100% agree, treat it like a wound. Doesn't matter if it's a broken bone or a deep cut. If you just go and back to work and keep treating it like nothing happened, it's never going to get better. Leave it alone. Let it do its thing. It will come. You just have to be patient with it. But unfortunately, patience isn't something you can purchase. You have to figure it out. The other thing is consistency when you're dealing with designing those heavy clay soils. You do not want to be plowing laterals deeper than necessary because you want that heavy clay to dry evenly. That's where we were saying earlier that you want to go a little bit shallower than you would with your standard lighter soils. Because you want the drains to work a little bit quicker, space them a little closer together, and keep them at a consistent depth everywhere, or else you're going to see light and dark spots in the spring when it's not drying off evenly.
Okay, so now so Jason asked 50 feet or 75 feet, is there a magical number? I'm going to guess that there isn't. I'm going to guess it's the magical, it depends. But Matt, to your point, a little closer, a little shallower. Jesse, have you had good success with either of those widths or both?
The thing with width, there you go. Depending what you're growing, we work with Pub 29, so lots of times it'll say between 20 and 50 foot spacings. So what is the magic number? I would say when the yield monitor doesn't change in the combine, you've got them close enough. So
Gotcha.
if it doesn't, but yeah, so it comes down to money. So there's return on investment. There's so many variables with this. So I don't like to tile, I should say, much wider than 40 feet. You have to start getting the tile down a little deeper just so you don't get those, major yield changes in between the tile runs. So, yeah, I would say 40 is as wide as I would like to go. And there's lots of people, especially like Matt had said earlier, with the price of land in some of the places around here now. 20s are the new 40s. Like it doesn't matter because you're only paying whatever 10% of what the land is. So it makes no difference. Let's make it yield as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, that would be the real world answer. Is it's budget driven. That's the reality. Like Jesse said, you use Pub 29 to get the recommended spacing for the soil type, but ultimately it comes down to the crops that you're growing, your farming practices, and what your budget is for that year.
And where the water goes, Jason. You're going to have to figure out where you're going to send it and how far it takes to get to the river. So there you go. Because depending on the grade, again, there is none. So that is definitely a consideration. All right. So fantastic. We're almost out of time. And I will say I took a lot of notes ahead of this one. One of the things I think to maybe touch base on here is you did touch on it, Matt, on working on sort of if you've got issues coming and cleaning them out. Jesse, I'll ask you, what sort of maintenance should you plan for when you're dealing with tile? Do you have a good, like, every 2 years do this, or do you just wait till problems show up, or are there good sort of best management practices for maintenance?
I would say outlets and inlets twice a year. So, or every time you're driving by with the sprayer or something, if you see something or if there is something amiss in your field, first thing you want to go check is, hey, do I have a problem with my outlet? If you're seeing a big wet spot close to a surface inlet, or say your French drain or whatever, has some fines got down there? Has it sealed it off? Can it not? Or have you had a crazy hard rain event and you've put some fines there and packed it off and made a bit of a pond? So sometimes you have to break that stuff back up. Once again, let your water get down to the tile quicker. Yeah, do you have a bunch of leaves or something that have went around your Hickenbottom so now nothing can get in there? So it is constantly maintained. You don't just never look at it again. So I say spring and fall, absolute minimum. But after that, I would say any other time you see an issue, and you can talk to your contractor. If your outlets are looking good, your inlets are looking good, and you're having an issue, that's a good time to talk to your contractor. But yeah, twice a year minimum.
At a minimum. Matt, do you agree?
Definitely. And just to add to that, really want to stress the timing. The way I like to say it is, don't use your tractor and cultivator to do your scouting, because we don't want to follow guys around with the excavator. It's a timing thing. Go out early in the spring, as soon as it starts drying off. If it's too wet to go out with an ATV or a tractor, maybe find a drone or rent a drone or buy a drone, whatever your interests are. They're great. You don't create any compaction. You can buzz your fields really quickly. Look for those dark spots. Look for potential problems. Water that's ponding longer than maybe it should be. It's great to get a head start so that we can plan as contractors and send our guys out to do the maintenance when you have it planned ahead. Certain things you might want to look for as well is if there's freshly tiled ground and you have a sinkhole. In our area, we find 90% of the time that's an old clay tile or an existing tile that has taken on some dirt. So usually it's not a problem. But if you have water bubbling up, by all means, that's an issue. You want to get that corrected right away. So that's a good time to call your contractor. If it's a massive sinkhole the size of your pickup truck, definitely call your contractor. You want to get those fixed.
Absolutely. Yes, please. Also, this is excellent timing for anyone who is wondering what to put on their Christmas list. Get a drone. So there you go. All right. Peter does have a follow-up question on the plugged tile. Do Y connectors help versus T connectors for plugs? Matt or Jesse, do either of you have thoughts?
I'll be honest, I think they would help. We don't use Y connectors. We've always used T connectors. And then having said that, we don't have a lot of problems at the T in terms of the roots. It is certainly common. I'd say probably 50% of the time that's where the plug is. But I would think that a Y connector would help with that. But essentially, it's going to push that ball down further. And then you hope it gets out the outlet, but chances are it's going to plug the outlet.
Jesse?
Yeah, I've used Ys in the past. They're a little trickier. Yeah, you have to really be going off on a good 45-degree angle off of your main for them to work well. So yeah, I guess in a 4x4 situation that could probably work or help a little bit. I haven't found, like Matt said, as many issues right at the T. The T actually goes on the outside of the tile, so it kind of lets that as a free flow run through, and you're actually getting two areas of water going into one spot, so it can actually almost create not necessarily pressure, but if there is a little restriction there and you get a bunch of water, it can help there, as opposed to on the length of a lateral where it doesn't have that flow of water to carry it. So I wouldn't think too many of them, they might end up at the T, so maybe they would end up at the Y too. But I have most of my problems, I would say, on laterals, not even on my mains. Usually once I get them into if the root ball does get into the main, it can usually get itself out.
Or at least to the outlet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'll find it. Keep looking. You'll find it. All right. Let's leave it there. Thank you both so much. Jesse, you have a shout out that you asked you could do, and you didn't do it yet, so I'm going to make you. Where can people go for more information?
Yeah, please visit the LICO website. It's drainage.org. Most of the stuff that Matt and I have spoke about tonight is on this. There's a ton of fact sheets going back 40 years, 50 years of all this kind of stuff. The research that's been done by OMAFRA, LICO, University of Guelph. So please visit it. It's got all this information. And then if you want to get yourself a publication 29, you can pick one up there too. So that's good.
Yeah, there. Matt's got his. He's doing his arm curls with it. Maybe you could get a signed copy. There you go. Yeah, there you go. All right. That's drainage.org. And if you'd like to see these gents on the Talking Tiles series, head on over to our YouTube channel at Real Agriculture, and you can find it there as well. Matt, Jesse, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having us.
All right. And thank you to our show sponsors, of course, the Sharp Edge, Enlist E3, and ADAMA Canada, of course. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in the comments. Great questions and wonderful feedback. I really appreciate it. Next week, we're going to talk technology. We're going to talk Agrotechnica next week. So be back here, 8 p.m. Eastern next week. Cheers, everybody.